First of all, I'd like to thank the River Herring Technical Committee and Stock Assessment Subcommittee, and I'm going to just call that the SAS because I'm not going to say all those words every time. But I'd like to commend them for their efforts around this stock assessment, and we're really happy to be a part of the group that got to review it. So the review workshop was June 4th to 7th in Arlington, Virginia, and our scientific review focused on the data inputs, analytical methods, results, and overall quality of the stock assessment. Obviously, we all have access to the materials, the scientific review panel was the chair, a chair, and 2 additional technical reviewers with expertise in anadromous fish biology and population dynamics, stock assessment modeling, data limit methods, fish passage, and bycatch estimation. I fulfill some of those, but I was very fortunate to have Dr. Heather Balby from the Fisheries and Oceans Canada, who has had experience working on river herring, although works on elasmo ranks currently, but a rich experience in stock assessment, and Dr. John Wiedemann, who also spends time on the Science Statistical Committee with me and the New England Fisheries Management Council, and has a lot of experience working in stock assessment. So a really great group of people, and I think that we hopefully did the assessment justice in our review. Okay, so while not mentioned here, I'll probably mention this a couple of times. This remains a data-limited complex of stocks, as Dr. Conroy mentioned, and they remain depleted from a coast-wide perspective, and this follows a decade or more of restoration efforts and moratoria in numbers of states that simply haven't really improved status beyond some marginal improvements. However, most of the population trends themselves were flat, and I try not to get in the weeds here too much, but when I say population trends, I really do mean the run counts, the indices, and all the life history indices as well. So, but for right now, I'm just talking about mostly about the population trends, where there was high variability in many of those surveys, and there just was a lack of ability to detect trends. And while no official statement was made regarding the current rates of mortality, total mortality was quite high in many of the individual stocks, as pointed out by Dr. Conroy's presentation. All right, from one of the, primarily, I mean, it was sort of spread throughout the assessment, but within one of the statistical catch-at-age models on the Monument River, there was certainly an indication that there was high mortality occurring during the ocean period of the life history of river herring. And many members of the public and managers brought up concerns over the potential high levels of discard mortality, or at least about the lack of current monitoring of those of that mortality. The new habitat-based model shows a lot of promise and indicates a lower productivity overall due to dams and habitat loss. And we certainly, as a group, encouraged the continued development of that to bring in more information about how the habitat varied in quality, as well as trying to use information that sort of grounded the habitat model to some of the other aspects of their life history. One of the honestly, one of the biggest positive things of the habitat model, apart from the model itself, was also the growth modeling and other sort of synthesis of information that occurred as part of that. It was a really encouraging and monumental amount of effort, primarily by Dan Stitch, so I'll give him a call out at this point. Based on the current methodology, analyses, and interpretation of results, we believe that the assessment provides the best available science. But again, I think that there are just in general with river herring ways to go to bringing these stocks to a more data-rich scenario would allow us to say more about the sources of mortality and provide better recommendations for management action. So I'm going to step through each of the tours that we had as part of the review. And the first was to evaluate the choice of stock structure. So we really, as a group, thought that the use of the genetic information to aggregate the information into these broader regions that were not defined necessarily by state as a positive move forward. However, since most of the mortality is very much river specific, and certainly runs that are still experiencing harvest that are harvested at the specific river or run, we recognize that the unit, the river, is still the stock unit that is most important. From a recommendation standpoint, we recommended that there be further data collection from populations and fisheries for apportionment of discard mortality at sea, but also just to try to continue to better understand the spatial aspects of river herring during their complex life history. I'll also say at this point that the lack of data along some parts of the coast in terms of the genetics led to there being sort of not quite enough information to really nail down perfect stock units, and I think there's just an overall more work to be done in both genetic genetic analysis, as well as collecting information for future analyses of genetics in those discards. Again, we're very happy with the amount of data that was collected on river herring from both fisheries dependent and independent sources. I think it's important to acknowledge that there are significant limitations, data limitations, that remain as a significant issue for these stocks, particularly with the lack of standardized methods for aging and for developing abundance indices. So I'm actually going to do the second recommendation first, because it feels like it leads from that last second comment better. And that is that one of the things that I think it comes out really nicely in what Dr. Conroy just presented was the fact that many rivers only had one index, or one life history index, or a run count, or a juvenile index, or an adult survey of some kind. And one of the problems is that it was, as again noted by Dr. Conroy, is that it's difficult to assign mortality or understand where there are issues when you have such disparate data. And so we really think that one of the things that might be helpful is to continue to develop the surveys and standardized methods, but focus on a few rivers across the region that allow there to be these sort of sentinel populations that allow a better understanding of what is occurring within that river, sort of like what we saw in the Monument River. And then, of course, there's just an overall missing data across the board from supplementing other surveys that are currently collecting parts of the information that are useful, so either a run count, but not really collecting enough information for some other aspect. But also just in general, the discard monitoring is an area that is certainly needed. So the tour 3 was to evaluate the assessment methods and models. So as I noted, this remains a data poor assessment. And so the majority of river systems, there was only just this one type of monitoring data that would exist, and that could be used as some kind of index, whether it be abundance, run count, or so forth. And that's certainly a limitation. The catch curve estimation of total mortality, Z, compared to the reference point developed by the Spawner stock recruitment biomass per recruit model, seemed appropriate, and I have a feeling I called ZF later, and I apologize ahead of time, unless someone fixed it. And so certainly that we feel like this was a big step in the right direction for the assessment of these populations, although there's certainly some issues that were identified, I think, a little bit in the weeds, but certainly worth continued exploration around how to best estimate mortality and make comparisons to the biological reference points. The trend analysis, Mann-Kendall and Arima on the survey and other data sources provided a little additional information, but I think you got the general sense that trends have been generally flat since the last assessment, and so there really hasn't been a lot of either improvement or enough power, and that's sort of the next or within this, or enough power to detect those trends, which frankly is a problem across a lot of surveys anyway. And then, of course, the statistical catch at age models were updated for 3 rivers and suggested high at sea mortality, although only one of those models was really, I think, at the level that was capable of doing those kinds of making that kind of inference. Sorry, there's a giant truck passing my house. So for the conclusions of the assessment methods, we believe that there needs to be a continued development of these bycatch caps based on the abundance. We thought that that was certainly a step forward from the more historical sort of what has been caught. However, there were a number of issues identified, particularly interannual variability in cap estimates. And so we just think that there needs to be a little bit of additional thought on this process. But it seemed like a very, in general, a positive way forward. We were, as a group and individually, we were concerned about the use of a fully spatial bycatch avoidance approach, because it wouldn't inherently track the magnitude of bycatch or adjust things as part of that. And so we really felt that there would have to be some kind of cap implemented concurrently with spatial management to avoid the potential negative outcomes that could follow through from that. Of course, there are ways around that. Which leads to one of the comments, which is that we think in developing these ideas, especially for these time area closures, you really need some clear management objectives that are going to be complicated by the fact that they're going to be multi-species driven, and that these clear management objectives need to be defined a priori. And there's a reference provided in the document to help tease that out more. So in Tour 4, we were asked to identify the best estimates of stock abundance, total mortality, and exploitation for management use. So some of this is going to be a little bit redundant. The first one is just a reemphasis of the idea that for a majority of river systems, there was only one type of monitoring data that was able to be used, and this really limits interpretation. I think Dr. Conroy gave some good examples. The trend analysis on survey CPUE and run sizes, mean length, and mean length of age data really gave mixed results, and in general had a low power. There were some, I would say, weak positive outcomes from that, but in general, I think that the group took it as a whole that the trends were generally pretty flat and unchanged. There's the F40 in the next line. So there was I think there was high mortality across all of the runs, across many runs, and there seemed to be high mortality occurring within the runs in the north. One point I'm just going to make here that I think is worth everybody being aware of, and that is that the use of age 5 and further, an older fish in terms of developing the mortality estimates certainly is a bit of a limiting factor in terms of understanding the full dynamics of what's going on over life history. Obviously, a positive way forward, but just to recognize that there is bycatch mortality occurring as well as in-river mortality during the return for spawning. And so I think that those, while initially I was surprised that those mortality rates were high, I think that there are some potentially confounding factors in there a little bit as well. The statistical catch at age modeling suggested high at sea mortality, and the habitat model suggested continuing need for improvement of habitat access, or that said another way, that we're still very much below the baseline of undammed systems as based on the habitat model. We just suggested the continued development of these data-limited methods for developing a bycatch cap based on trends in abundance, and really thought that that type of method moving forward was likely to balance the need for some flexibility in the approach, but also recognizing that it's not just the historical catch that drives the potential for bycatch. There's some recommendations, and some of these are redundant, but to have these sentinel sites that are tracking more data or more indices to allow for better interpretation of results. Move the statistical catch at age models to more of a population viability analysis, which is really just a tweak, and hoping that more of those sentinel sites will lend themselves to becoming statistical catch at age models in the future, so that we really have a better tracking of a coastwide of the process of what's going on coastwide. We continue the development. We really encourage the continued development of that habitat modeling approach. Really think there's a lot of promise in that. And then, of course, to work with the New England Fisheries Management Council's plant development teams in both the herring and mackerel to work on approaches to limiting bycatch, and also to continue to better monitor those fisheries. So we overall we agree with the assessment that the river herring stocks remain depleted, and although there is a low power to detect trends, there's an increased monitoring need, and a better standardization of techniques, and hopefully movement towards some of these sentinel sites. So it will help, I think, understand better how populations are trending. Mortality exceeded the biological reference points in many rivers, and at sea mortality appears to be high. So while river herring stocks remain data poor and status determinations were impossible, we do find that the lack of recovery given the last decade of restoration and effort is troubling. A quick note here, though, that many areas are still improving access and improving, and so many of those populations may not have entered into the assessment. So we hope that in the future these sort of improving areas might get more call out. But we do believe that the lack of discard mortality monitoring remains a really important missing element for the assessment, and leaves us a little bit of a difficult position in terms of assigning or apportioning where the issues are in terms of what's limiting the recovery of these populations. So this is really on the research recommendations. So the panel really recognized the importance of an improved estimation of bycatch and discard mortality, and so this is essentially it's really working on comparing the current analytical techniques in a sensitivity analysis to understand and assess their relative predictive ability in estimating total bycatch. And this is particularly important because river herring are a schooling fish, and those numbers are, they're just not a typical fish population in many ways. And I think they need a little bit of work on the analytical side. And it was really a strong recommendation by the peer review panel. Certainly continuing to explore these iSlope was probably the preferred version of between the two, but to continue to explore these. Since incidental catch seems to comprise the largest source of ongoing fishing mortality, and it remains high for many populations, the focus on bycatch at this point is fairly urgent. Continued improvement of the habitat model by incorporating major sources of mortality, and then to use observed data to ground truth the outputs. So really excited about some of the advances in that habitat model, and actually an assessment overall. Okay, so these are still high priority for us, but we recognize that some high priority things you can pick up at a computer and do. Those were the things we just discussed. These things involve a little bit more on the ground work and sort of more collaboration beyond the United States Marine Fisheries Commission. So of equal priority, although with implementation over a longer time period, would be improved monitoring of via port sampling or dockside monitoring to collect more information about the species in bycatch. Because most of these species are full retention, or many of them are, we really don't have to require observer coverage, and so we really hope that this can be a step forward in the next over the next numbers of years towards the next assessments. The panel also saw a high priority and continued improvement of enumeration techniques, including hydroacoustics, eDNA, other run count, sort of video imaging processing with machine learning. All these ideas to increase the amount of information that we have, increase its reliability, and then hopefully do so in such a way that dovetails with those other types of data being collected about the life histories, so that we can continue to have more sites that we have better interpretation of the overall data. Then for a medium priority, we had a sort of a need to implement sampling programs where this is actually sort of going back to what I just said, which is the sort of having these sentinel sites where we sort of would be collecting more information about the overall life history of the species in a single river. This was something that Dr. Balby brought up a number of times, and I think is actually something that would be well worth some effort, would be a detailed river history and inventory that captures current population numbers, details about restoration, and documents data that's collected and what those methods are, in order to really help interpret current status, but also to allow people to use as a resource moving forward. And I know there's a little bit of work out of Maine that's sort of trying to get at that, so something to think about in the future. River herring specific surveys would be of great benefit to the assessment. Some of the best surveys in terms of how they provided, in terms of how they operated with the power to detect trends were actually surveys developed for river herring. And I guess there's not surprise there, but the dependence on a lot of surveys that were not either timed or developed to collect information on river herring, no doubt increases the amount of variability in those surveys and then makes them a less powerful to detect the trend. So either tweaks or changes or new surveys to increase the ability to understand what's going on with the population would be of great value. The panel considered most of the other medium and high priority research objectives that were identified at the SAS to be a little bit less important, only because they had a lower likelihood of actually leading to information that would directly inform the management in the next assessment. And that's not to say that they're not important, but this just feels like the ones I just presented were the critical issues where we really need additional work to move the assessment and management of river herring forward over the next decade. So TOR 7 was recommend the timing of the future stock assessments, and we simply agreed with the SAS that the update in 5 years and a benchmark assessment in 10 years would be appropriate, given sort of the life history of the species. Sort of talking about a couple of generations that would go by through, by the next benchmark. Hopefully, we've seen some improvement and things have continued to gather steam, both in terms of restoration, but also in terms of our overall data collection to inform how things are moving and in which direction. So I just wanted to, as a closing comments, one of the things that I talk about in my fisheries class are the time lags between when things occur and when decisions get made. And in the meantime, since we did the review, I've also sat in the ASFC, and there were just a pretty significant cuts to the Atlantic herring fishery that occurred. And I also know that the Atlantic mackerel fishery is facing some challenges. And so there's sort of an interesting moment here in terms of what's going to happen with bycatch. And I don't rejoice in any of these things. I think that they're all complicated and challenging, but certainly working with the relevant PDTs, seems like we're right at this moment where these bycatch caps and spatial management could be really rethought as hopefully as we see a return in Atlantic herring in the future. And then just to point out sort of a concern of mine, and that is that we don't have a lot of forage fish in the Gulf of Maine area. And one of the things that my research and one of my graduate students working on ecosystem models pointed out was that sometimes the consumption can actually be a really big source of mortality and can sort of overwhelm any fisheries-based changes in management. So just as a concern here that that with herring lower, river herring are going to be a more important forage item to many predators. And so I think we have some challenges coming up over the next decade, and I look forward as a researcher to be involved in those, and hopefully I can be involved in this type of process moving forward as well. I think that might be it. Thank you.